Hey everyone, today I wanted to do something a little bit different. I came up with some kind of like, I guess, dream casting choices for the next James Bond. Not just who would be Bond, but who would be the villain or villains, the Bond girls or girl, some cars in the movie, and then who would sing the title song. Uh, I went through this really quick. There's, plenty of options you could do for any of these, but I tried to go with some that were kind of the first thoughts in my head. Not only that, but like some of my favorites too. But yeah, we'll go through these. Those are the topics I'll be covering. So, starting off with who plays James Bond. My first choice, and really who I'm like really wanting to see play James Bond, is Henry Cavill. Or Cavill. I'm not even sure how to pronounce it exactly, but he's my number one choice, like above everyone. I really want to see him after seeing him in The Man from Uncle, which is this where you see the shot here. He's really obviously like a great actor, but he's played in multiple movies now where he plays like a spy type, both in that and then in the Mission Impossible series. Um, you'll notice there's actually a lot of Mission Impossible cast in here because I just the particular two movies that I really liked. I think that the cast fit both well in a James Bond movie and in a Mission Impossible. But yeah, he's my number one. If I got to pick anyone, he'd be who I'd go with. He really wants to be Bond too, so I think that's a big part of it. He's only 40. Daniel Craig, I think, was 38 or 39. So, and I think he's in just as good or maybe even better shape. So, next is kind of one that most people probably don't know. At least I've never really heard anyone talk about him, but his name is Aidan Turner. He's Irish. He's not British like Henry is, but where I saw him and where he stood out to me, and this is really actually the only thing that I've seen him in because I think he plays more like British roles, was the TV series And Then There Were None. He plays the character Philip Lombard, if you're familiar with that story. Uh, Philip is kind of like the main male protagonist, or maybe not even protagonist character, I guess we'll say. And he plays kind of like a mercenary type, where in the show, or I guess we'll say in the story, he's kind of like a hired gun or kind of like just does anything like that. Well, the story is, 10 people on an island and they are all being killed off one by one. Well, it's funny because his one weakness in that is a woman, and that's very similar to Bond. I feel like he looks like he could be Bond. Um, so yeah, he'd be my second choice. And I only went with two for Bond because those are the two that came to my head. Bond has such a particular look that I'm one of the people that I like to keep it close to the look of Bond that is written. While Daniel Craig is a really good Bond, I didn't feel like his look was so far out of like left field. It wasn't a redhead Bond. He was a light brown hair. I'd say it's not even blonde. Like it's not bleach blonde. So, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of actors that I feel like would do a great job as Bond, but those were the two that I wanted to cover. Now on to the villains. Not like I said, another Mission Impossible casting choice here. Sean Harris was so good as the villain. I think he's probably my second favorite villain in the Mission Impossible series, behind, I can't, in Mission Impossible Three's villain. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I'm terrible at remembering names, but yeah, he'd be my first choice most likely. I mean, my two villains that I have. The first two, I think honestly you could go with either one of them, and I think both are great. But yeah, if you've seen the Mission Impossible series, he's great in that as the villain, and then he's a really good actor. I've seen him in the movie. He was like a kind of a horror. It's called Possum. Not anything like Bond in any way, but yeah, just he's got the range to play anything. Is kind of what I was getting at. Um, and most people know him from Breaking Bad. I want to say it's pronounced Giancarlo, or I'm honestly terrible at trying to pronounce. But yeah, Giancarlo Esposito, if that's how you pronounce it. Him, and Sean Harris are pretty much tied for first. The only reason I guess Sean Harris is because it'd be reuniting him with Henry Cavill. So it'd be kind of interesting, but you can't go wrong with either of these. He's been a villain in so many things recently, ever since Breaking Bad. He's been the villain in The Mandalorian. He was the villain in Far Cry 6, I believe. Um, so I also feel like, setting of the movie would be a big, you know, if it's in Europe, I feel like it's also Sean Harris be probably a better villain for like a Europe setting. But if it's like America, South America, maybe even in Spain over in Europe, anything like that, somewhere where maybe like even like drug cartels are a big thing. Like he could play like a role like that. But I think that he's got obviously the look of a villain, but he's got the acting ability to play like a Bond villain. And um, yeah, I would love to see him in a Bond movie. This one's more of I thought of it because I recently saw him. He had an audition for uh, Bond back in like the late, or maybe it was the early '80s. I'm not sure. Whenever Roger Moore had stepped down for being Bond, there was the auditions, and Sam Neill was one of them. And you can find this on YouTube. It's interesting to see because I actually think he would have been pretty decent. He reminds me kind of Pierce Brosnan. But Timothy Dalton, I mean, I think that was also a great casting choice. I don't think you could have gone wrong with either one of them. But he could be a main villain. He could be the next M. But in Event Horizon is where I saw him play the villain, so that's why I wrote it in there. And then my friend mentioned that recently the show Peaky Blinders. I didn't know he was in that, and he said that he didn't know that was who that was. And he's like, "Oh, the villain in that is really good." And yeah, that whole cast of that show, I need to watch that because I just recently like looked it up and I was like, man, there's so many good actors in this show that yeah. But either way, yeah, I think Sam Neill would be good in either of those two roles. Um, Next is one that most people, or maybe not most, but some people might not know, is Wes Bentley. How I actually know him from was, and maybe some other people, was Blackheart from Ghost Rider, the one from like the early 2000s with Nicolas Cage. I feel like he'd be both a good main villain or a henchman, just depending on, you know, the rest of the movie. But I feel like he'd be a good like villain to Aidan Turner, the Bond, the second option that I had. I feel like he'd match well with him more, but I think either one would be good. He's got that villain look, and then one of the cars that I picked when I saw it, I was like, that looks like something that like fits him. Whenever I get to it, you'll see what I'm talking about. Yeah, Wes Bentley I think would be a great choice. Michael Shannon was more just to reunite him and Henry in another movie to see them again. I think would be awesome. Now it might not be my first choice because we've seen it enough, but yeah, I mean they're both great together, and I don't know. Michael Shannon just would be, I feel like, a very interesting Bond villain. But yeah, we most know him from Man of Steel. Bug was another one where he played a really interesting character. It's not like his most famous role, but it's probably the first one I uh, remember him being in. It's not the first one I saw him in, but it's the earliest role, I guess. But yeah, interesting kind of like horror psychological thriller. Um, but yeah, and then Aiden Gillen is another one that if you've played the game Quantum Break, he was the villain Paul in there. And he's played roles in other things, but he's more minor roles. He's also at the beginning of The Dark Knight Rises. He's in the plane scene. He's the one that has that short little conversation with Bane that says, if I took the mask off of you, wouldn't that hurt? And he says, for you. But yeah, Aiden Gillen is someone I actually didn't know his name. I was like, I know that guy would be great. And I was like, I gotta look up his name. When I thought of like villains, I was like, that dude from Quantum Break was like great. There's like a part in that game because they have like half live action, half like animation, where uh, depending on the choices you make can alter the game. Well, if you choose like kind of towards the bad ending, Paul's character or Aiden Gillen's character starts to go kind of like crazy, and he kills his girlfriend in there, and it's like in a pretty brutal way. In that scene, I was like, dude, this guy's a really good villain, and ever since then, I was like, that I'd like to see him in more roles. He was also in Bohemian Rhapsody, I think, is the manager of Queen at the beginning. So yeah, he'd be a good choice. And then if we cast another Blofeld, I think Ben Mendelsohn would be a really good choice. Now, I don't know if they always have to have like an accent or not, but I'm sure he's capable of doing one. I've seen him in, mainly villain roles. I don't think I've ever seen him in anything else. Star Wars Rogue One was where I think he was the most predominant uh, or the most standout villain. Even though he's not the main one, he's one of the main ones and probably the one that gets the most screen time. And then he's also in The Dark Knight Rises as a character that Bane, I think, either breaks his nose or something like that. I remember. But yeah, he's a really good villain. I think he'd be an interesting Blofeld. We're going to move on to the women now. There are some mix of women who would be good villains and main Bond girls. She's my first choice. Rebecca Ferguson, I feel like would be, after seeing what she does in Mission Impossible, her mixed with either of the other two, my two options, or whoever was Bond, I feel like would be great. She's got also, I feel like, a look that would fit like Bond. I can't think of the actress, but she's kind of got a look of the For Your Eyes Only, the character or the actress who was the main character in there. I'm drawing a blank on her name, but she was the girl that whose like parents were murdered and she seeks revenge with Bond. But I think she kind of looks like her mixed with uh, Pam. I want to say her name was from License to Kill. But yeah, I I think she's like one of the most beautiful actresses. Not only that, but she's really good at in every role I've seen her in recently, especially her in Dune. I just recently watched Dune for the first time. That was really good. Uh, I put her age in there because she's close with Henry or Aiden, so I think it's not like a big age gap like in For Your Eyes Only with Roger Moore and BB was like pretty big age gap, and I mean like it's one thing in real life where you might not know like the situation, but like in a Bond movie where you know that they're usually just there to sleep with them. Where I actually feel like Rebecca Ferguson would be like a good. She could also be another MI6 agent or even another double O. I feel like she'd be good in pretty much any Bond girl role, um, even villain really. But I think she's more hero. Where Marion Cotillard, or I think is how you pronounce it, another one from Dark Knight Rises. I didn't even realize I was doing that actually. But she'd be like my second choice. And they could be in the same movie, separate movies. She could be the main Bond girl, main villain, main, like any of those. She's versatile enough. She's very like manipulative in most of the roles she plays in, where she's both like kind of working with the hero and then turns on them, or like in the movie Allied, which I put there, she falls in love with Brad Pitt's character. They're supposed to be like work Allied spies. Well, it turns out she's, I think, working with the Germans and she can't go like through with it or something. I don't even remember. It's been so long since I've seen it, but how the movie ends is really good, and I think that she could play the role of the like villain Bond girl, almost like Electra King, where she's like manipulative and like she uses her looks to manipulate Bond or something. But yeah, I think that she'd be a really great choice. And then another one that I feel like could even fit in the same movie in many different ways. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce her name, but we'll just Lupita, I think is her first name. I'm not even going to try the last one. But yeah, she's right around the same age also. I know she's a little bit old. She's not, that's not old. So, and I think that she could be, same thing. She could be a Bond girl. She could be a Bond villain. Um, Maybe not the main villain, but like one of the villains. Um, and then she could even be the new Moneypenny. Like if they recast all them, like I feel like she's very similar look to who they just had as Moneypenny in the last one. I can't remember her name, but uh, what stood out to me was her role in Us. She's both the hero and villain in the same scene, and like she does a good enough job. And then she was also in that movie uh, last year. I can't remember the name. I think it was last year. It was where like a bunch of women are like spies from different countries. I didn't see it, but I know that's an action movie, so she obviously has done action. So yeah, I think she'd work really well. Um, all three women, you know, beautiful enough definitely to be in there. However, you fit them in. I I'm okay with it. And then moving on to the cars. This is I looked up some like newer models of cars. Well, this one I pay attention to Aston Martin cars because I love them, just the looks of them. But this one I think isn't even like technically out yet. It's like the new one, but it might be out. I'm not sure, but it's the newest Aston Martin Vantage. I just love the look of that. I feel like that'd be Bond's car. I put the horsepower there just because it's in how fast it is compared to the next one, and so this is the one with the least amount of horsepower. That's 503 to 528, whereas the next one we've never seen. I don't believe Bond in an Audi, and I was like, okay, well, I drive an Audi. I really like it. But it's also I feel like some cars have looks to them. Like this could be both Bond's car or the villain's car. If let's just say it was like black or red or whatever color, dark gray, and something like that. Any of those could be the villains. Blondes could just be the silver or gray. White even could be actually depending on where it was taking place. But yeah, this one's horsepower is 560 to 602. It's almost all Audis are all-wheel drive, and the R8 is a really nice car. I'd love to drive any of these three cars that I have here, but um, the Aston Martin especially, then this one. Um, yeah, mine. I drive an Audi A3, so there's a big difference. And then lastly, this is definitely the villains. This was the car that I said when I saw Wes Bentley, I was like, he's got to have a car that he'd be like a really good villain to fit in this car. Like he's got the dark black hair, a dark black supercar like this McLaren P1, which I believe is the car that's in this. I know it's. I typed in McLaren P1, but McLarens all look so similar, and like I know cars, but I don't know them like so well to be like that's the McLaren 600 LT and that's the 675 LT just by like looking at them. And when I was typing them in, it was coming up with so many different ones. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go with when I typed in McLaren P1 in black. I was like, okay, I looked up one that was like in a cool drift, and but I purposely picked this car because the horsepower difference. I feel like it would be awesome to see like Bond in a car chase where he's got to like Inspector, where he's got to like use his gadgets in the car, but also like outdrive him when he's clearly beaten by horsepower. But yeah, I think that car would be awesome. And then last, who I want to sing the title song. I have one option, and this is the only one I want, and that is Lady Gaga singing the title song for if it was my movie. Like her voice, I feel like her vocal range fits very well with the style of some Bond like former singers who have sung the Bond titles. Shirley Bassey, Adele. I think she's got that sort of vocal range where if she kind of like left out her style maybe a little bit, but like her vocal range mixed with Bond's sound, like the songs, I think would kill the opening song. Um, I'm sure there's other ones, but like this was the one that came to mind, and I didn't even want to think of another one. I was like, nope, that's it. So yeah, that is that was just like I made that in an hour. It was like, okay, I'm gonna go through this, and like these are some just easy ones. Um, I had tons of villains, but I removed a few. Willem Dafoe. He was actually uh, a villain, a James Bond villain, technically, but in the game, Everything or Nothing for like PlayStation 2 and Xbox back when that came out. So he's already technically kind of played a Bond villain, but I mean, it's a video game. So I almost put him in there. And then this one was a little off the wall because I've seen him play a villain in the movie Maniac, but Elijah Wood. You wouldn't think that he'd be like a villain, but I feel like if he played a villain like Safin did, or maybe like Doctor No, but maybe even like a little bit of craziness to him, I think he'd be pretty good. I think more like Safin, but yeah, there was so many options I had for villains. I narrowed it down, and I kind of kept some of them. Like I don't know if I'd pick Sam Neill with my first choice or anything, but I've because I said he could be new M, and then I want to throw in that he did audition for Bond once, so yeah, definitely lobbying for Henry Cavill. So yeah, let me know what your guys' choices for these would be. Who you want as Bond, who you want as the villains, the Bond girls, some cars, who you want to sing the title song, all that. Maybe even some more things. But do you like my choices? And I appreciate you guys watching. I'll talk to you guys soon.